What brings you the happiness?
I would have to be honestly say that what makes me happiest is what I'm doing. You know, I enjoy two things about it. One, I know I'll win over time. That doesn't mean I'll beat everybody else or anything like that, but I'm in a game that's very, very, very easy if you have the right lessons in your mind about what you're buying. I'm not buying stocks. I'm buying pieces of overwhelmingly American business. And I'm happy when I'm doing it. I'm happy when stocks are going down. I'm happier when stocks are going down because I can buy more of them with the same amount of money. I'd be happy if I was a farmer. I'd want farmland to go down so I could buy more acreage. You know, if I was, it just makes sense.
She and her husband decided to move to Omaha. So they came to Omaha in 1919, and there she found a small colony of Russian Jews, so she started feeling more at home. And then as her oldest daughter went to school, she would come home, this daughter, Frances, and she would teach her mother the words she'd learned in school that day. And this woman, Rose Brumpkin, spent 20 years saving money, bringing first her siblings over, her mother and father, $50 at a time. She sold used clothing to do it. She had 4 children during this period. And by 1937, after 20 years, she'd saved $2,500. She went to Chicago and she bought what she could of furniture. Her dream had always been to open a furniture store. And this woman, who had never gone to school one day in her life, with $2,500, but with the same spirit that the people in this room had about having a dream and working to accomplish that dream, she built a business which she sold to me in 1983 for $60 million approximately, and which did $1.5 billion worth of business last year. The 4th generation is working in that business.
You say you don't look at macros. I can think of times in the past when you have looked at macro effects. When you looked back with stocks at a low, you told Americans to buy stocks with both hands.
Well, occasionally stocks are just demonstrably cheap. I mean, really demonstrably cheap. And I wrote an article in 1974, or I did an interview with Forbes in 2008. I wrote an article for the Times. And I mean, there are occasionally when they're just ridiculously cheap. Most of the time they're good value, but there have been a few times when I thought they were so cheap that I should say something.
You know, people have pointed out, obviously stocks have come a long way since then. People have been analyzing your annual report and realizing that you didn't really say anything like you've said in years past, where you said at one time a few years ago that stocks obviously were a much better value than gold.
It isn't hard work. Any shareholders listening, I'd like to tell them, you know, I'm bathed in sweat at the end of the day. It just isn't hard work. I play bridge every night. You know.
Did Ronald Reagan said about work?
Yeah, well, Ronald Reagan said, he said, they tell me that hard work never kills anybody. But he said, I feel, why take the chance?
The excerpt that you put into Fortune a few days ago that people have been really focusing on had 2 examples that were both around real estate. One, the farm that you bought here in Nebraska. Another, some real estate that you invested in just across the street from NYU, from New York University. And that has people speculating, do you think that real estate in other areas are better places for money than stocks right now?
No, but they're speculating wrong. I use those illustrations because I don't know that much about real estate or farms. And yet it was still possible to successfully invest in them. And I feel the same way about people on stocks. You can have a great lifelong experience in stocks and really not be a specialist in accounting or, you know all the ins and outs of capital structures and all of that sort of thing. And I was probably more ignorant of the realities of farming, the realities of that building in New York than most people are of stocks. And yet it was perfectly possible to come to an intelligent decision that you could not lose money in those investments and that you were probably going to make quite a bit of money.
When I was in high school, I really only had 2 things on my mind: girls and cars. and I wasn't doing very well with girls, so we'll talk about cars. But let's just imagine that when we finish, I'm going to let each one of you pick out the car of your choice. Sounds good, doesn't it? Pick it out, any color, you name it. It'll be tied up with a bow, and it'll be at your house tomorrow. And you say, well, what's the catch? And the catch is that it's the only car you're going to get in your lifetime. Now, what are you going to do knowing that that's the only car you're ever going to have and you love that car? You're going to take care of it like you cannot believe. Now, what I'd like to suggest, you're not going to get only one car in your lifetime, but you're going to get one body and one mind.
By far the best investment you can make is in yourself. For example, communication skills. If they just learn to communicate better, both in writing and in person, they increase their value at least 50%. If you can't communicate, somebody says, it's like winking at a girl in the dark. Nothing happens, basically. And you have to be able to get forth your ideas. That's relatively easy. I did it myself with the Dale Carnegie course. It's just hugely important. And if you invest in yourself, nobody can take it away from you.
My friend Jack started at age 35 in the car leasing business, and he had 7 cars. It was pretty slow. In fact, one of the things he did was whenever the phone rang, he let it ring 3 or 4 times so people would think that he was very busy answering other phones. And of course, it was the only call he was going to get all day. So his first venture was okay, but it wasn't really going to go anyplace. And there's a lesson in this for all of us. At age 40, he decided with 17 vehicles, 17 cars, he was going to go into competition in the rent-a-car business. So now he's taking on Hertz and Avis and National and people like that who have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of cars, and he's got 17 cars, and his cars aren't any different than theirs. I mean, he's buying them from General Motors or Ford or Chrysler, and he can't get the airport locations. Those companies have them all sold up. But he was determined that he would basically offer the customer, can't offer him a different car, but he can offer them friendlier service than they've ever seen. And so he started a company. He named it after the battleship that he'd flown from in the Pacific, which was the USS Enterprise. And he died about a year and a half ago. But when he died, his rent-a-car company, starting with those 17 cars, was worth more than Hertz and Avis and all the rest of the rental cars put together. The man's name was Jack Taylor, and his son, Andy Taylor, is a good friend of mine, runs the business now.
You're going to invest your money in something over time. The one thing you could be quite sure of is if we went into some very major war, the value of money would go down. I mean, that's happened in virtually every war that I'm aware of. So the last thing you'd want to do is hold money during a war. And you might want to own a farm, you might want to own an apartment house, you might want to own securities. But I mean, during World War II, the stock market advanced, and the stock market's going to advance over time. American businesses are going to be worth more money. Now, dollars are going to be worth less, so that money won't buy you quite as much. But you're going to be a lot better off owning productive assets over the next 50 years than you will be owning pieces of paper, or I'm going to throw in bitcoins.
I've been meaning to ask you your opinion on Bitcoin. What do you think of it?
It's not a currency. It does not meet the test of a currency. I wouldn't be surprised if it's not around in 10 or 20 years.
Why does it not meet the definition of a currency?
Well, because people say, well, I'll sell you goods in bitcoins, but they change the price of those every time the price of the dollar changes in relation to the bitcoin. They're pricing off the dollar. They could say, well, I'll sell it to you in barrels of oil, but if every time the price of oil changes, they change the number of barrels you have to have. That's not your oil is not the currency.
Yeah, but the yuan does that too, and people still look at that as a potential currency.
Which one?
The yuan, the Chinese yuan.
Well, it is a currency, but it is not a durable means of exchange. It's not a store of value. It's.
And you said yourself you wouldn't be surprised if it's not around in 10 years?
I would not be surprised. I don't know that, but it's interesting to me.